Today, we're not going to give you any parenting advice. Nope. Instead, we're going on a little journey. We're going to look at how the actual science of parenting has changed over time. We're diving into how researchers have tried and are still trying to answer one of the most fundamental questions about who we are.
For, more than a century, this was it. This was the heavyweight title fight of psychology. Nature versus nurture. Are we who we are because of our genes, or is it all about how we were raised? It was this huge, epic debate.
But what if the whole premise was flawed from the start? What if that's just the wrong question to be asking? Well, that's pretty much what modern science figured out. Trying to pit these two massive forces against each other, it turned out to be a dead end. Researchers realized they weren't enemies in a ring. They were more like partners in a really, really complex dance. And that shift, well, it changes absolutely everything. So the question we ask now isn't which one, it's how. How do our genes and our environment actually interact and work together? This opens up these incredible fields like epigenesis, which is this wild idea that your environment, including the parenting you get, can act like a series of light switches, turning certain genes on or off. It's just a much more interesting and way more accurate picture. So, to understand how we got to this super nuanced view, we've got to rewind. We have to go back to the beginning, when early psychologists were developing these really broad theories. Think of them like the first set of lenses they used to try and make sense of the whole parent-child thing. The first lens is evolutionary theory. This one takes the longest view possible, like way, way back. It's asking, over thousands and thousands of years, what parenting behaviors actually helped our ancestors' kids survive long enough to have their own kids. It's all about the survival of the species, really.
And here is a fantastic example of that from the ethologist Konrad Lorenz. He pointed out that what we call cuteness, the big eyes, the round head, the tiny nose on a baby, that's not some random accident. It's actually an evolutionary adaptation. Those features trigger a caring, protective response in adults, which, you guessed it, makes it much more likely that the baby will survive. It's instinct, shaped over millennia.
Okay, so from the giant zoomed-out picture of evolution, the next lens zooms right in on the individual relationship. And this is attachment theory, which I bet a lot of you have heard of. John Bowlby was the pioneer here, and he argued that the most important thing is that secure emotional bond between a child and their parent. When a parent is responsive and reliable, the child builds what Bowlby called an internal working model, basically a blueprint for how relationships are supposed to work for the rest of their life.
Then there's socialization theory. This lens looks at how kids learn the rules of the road for their specific society. It's the whole process of teaching them, whether you mean to or not, how to be a competent person in their culture. And of course, parents are the main teachers in that class.
And a huge part of that is just watching and learning. The psychologist Albert Bandura broke it down beautifully. First, a kid has to pay attention to what a parent is doing. Then, they have to store a memory of that action. Then, if they have a reason to, the motivation, they'll imitate it. And they're most likely to copy parents who they see as being both powerful and loving.
So these big theories were really foundational. But then, in the 1970s, the research took a really practical turn. There was a landmark study that kind of shifted the whole conversation away from these broad ideas to something more concrete, specific, observable patterns of parenting.
And this is it. This hugely influential idea came from the psychologist Diana Baumrind. She saw that parenting styles could be mapped onto two key dimensions: warmth, how responsive and loving a parent is, and control, or how demanding they are. When you get a parent who is high on both, that's the authoritative style, which she found was linked to kids who are more confident and independent. You can see on the chart how the other combos lead to different outcomes. And that fourth style, neglectful, that was actually added a bit later to complete the model.
But there was a giant piece of the puzzle that was just missing. From almost all of this early work, these models were still too simple, and a huge update was about to come along. They would pretty much change the entire field. For decades and decades, scientists saw the whole thing as a one-way street. The parent did something, and the child was just the passive little blob that received the action. It was all about what the parent did to the child. The arrow of influence only pointed in one direction.
And then came 1968.
Richard Bell published a paper with this bombshell of a line. He called for a complete reinterpretation of the direction of effects. He was essentially holding up a giant sign to the entire field of psychology and asking, hey, are we absolutely sure we have the arrow pointing the right way?
And that question led to this massive shift. We went from that unidirectional view to a bidirectional one. It became clear that influence is a two-way street. A child's own personality, their temperament, their behaviors, all of that shapes how the parent responds. Think about it. A chill, easygoing kid is probably going to get a different style of parenting than a kid who is more intense and demanding. The child isn't a passive recipient. They're an active player in their own development.
So all of that brings us to where we are now. And today, the science of parenting is so much more complex, so much more sophisticated. It takes all of those lessons from the past and weaves them together into a much, much more complete picture.
Remember that simple lens we talked about at the start? Well, it's been upgraded. Big time. Today's lens is more like a high-powered, multifaceted scientific instrument. It lets us see the parent-child relationship from a ton of different angles, all at the same time.
And with this powerful new lens, researchers can ask these incredibly deep and specific questions. For example, parent cognition looks at not just what parents do, but what they're actively thinking and feeling while they're doing it. Family systems theory looks at how the whole family dynamic, like the relationship between co-parents, affects the child. It's not about finding one single cause anymore, but about understanding how all these different pieces of the puzzle fit together. The progress here has just been staggering. I mean, think about it. In a little over a century, the study of parenting has exploded from what was basically a cottage industry, just a few curious people, into a major field of science, with thousands of researchers publishing an unbelievable number of studies every year.
So when you look at the whole journey, maybe the biggest change of all has been in the goal itself. Science isn't really searching for the one right way to be a parent anymore. Instead, the real goal is to understand parenting for what it actually is, a deeply complex, constantly changing, and incredibly personal process that's shaped by countless different factors.
What a journey, right? Moving from those simple black and white ideas to this rich, complex, multi-layered understanding we have today. And it really leaves us with this final, fascinating question. Our world is changing so fast, with new technologies, new social pressures. So how will the science of parenting keep adapting and evolving to meet the challenges of tomorrow?